So question 9 is a function that's going to remove a number from an array. So you have an array of a whole load of values, you pass in one number, and if that number is in the array, it's meant to return a version of it with that removed. First of all though, it's asking about what's meant by the scope of a variable. So scope is either going to be local or global. If we look at this code and use that as an example, new list and new position, those are both being declared inside the function, so they're local variables. And that means that they can only be accessed inside this function, they only exist inside this function. Whereas these ones, numbers and delete value, they're being declared in the main algorithm outside of a particular function or procedure, so that means that they're global variables and they can be accessed anywhere. So the scope of a variable is the part of the code where it can be accessed or used. Part 2 asks about a benefit of limiting the scope of a variable in modular programming. So in other words, making a variable local in modular programming. Well, so it can only be accessed in that module. Of course, that in and of itself is not an advantage. So there's no error caused from having two variables with the same name in different modules. Now, really crucial when we're talking about that, same name in different modules are mentioned. So if you get another question about local variables, has come up sometimes, it's not that you could have a variable existing in multiple modules. That doesn't really make any sense. It's different variables, they're separate from each other, but they happen to have the same name. But because they're in different modules and they only exist within that module, it doesn't matter. This last part of the question asks us to describe the operation of line 22 during the execution of the program. So we need to look at what line 22 is. So this is the line that is calling a function. So we've got a variable new nums that the result is going to be stored in, and it's calling this removal function and passing in numbers and delete value as parameters. The removal function that we're calling is the function that's been declared up here. So what really happens is the execution jumps to there. It's expecting two parameters, the list of values and a target. So we're passing in numbers, becomes a list of values, and delete value or variables from down here becomes the target that we're looking for. In terms of how I express that in an answer, it calls the function, calls the removal function, passes in numbers and delete value as parameters, and then it stores the result in new nums